The fog lay thick over Bond Street that November evening, muffling the sound of carriages and motorcars alike, as though the city itself wished to conceal what had just occurred. The lamps glowed dimly through the grey veil, turning the polished shop windows into blurred mirrors. It was near closing time when the first cry shattered the hush. Miss Eleanor Graves, assistant to the renowned jeweller Ashcroft Blythe, had fainted behind the counter. When the constable arrived, summoned by a trembling passer-by, he found her pale and shaking, pointing toward the inner office. The safe stood open. Inside, where the Ashcroft blue diamond had rested for nearly 40 years, there was nothing. At first glance, it appeared a straightforward theft. The lock showed no damage. The windows were secured from within. The back door remained bolted. No alarm had sounded, yet the most curious detail lay not in what was missing, but in what remained. On the velvet shelf, precisely where the diamond should have been, sat a small object, a single white glove. It was of the finest kid leather, perfectly clean, and clearly made for a lady. No pair, only one. The constable turned it over several times, frowning. No initials, no mark, no scent of perfume. It seemed absurdly theatrical, as though the thief had wished to leave behind a joke. Miss Graves insisted she had seen no one. The last customer had departed at 6. She had locked the front door herself. Mr. Harold Blythe, the senior partner, had left earlier to attend a dinner. The other staff had gone. She had been alone. "Did you open the safe?" the inspector asked. "Yes," she whispered, to check the stone before closing. "It was there, I am certain. I turned for no more than a minute to fetch the ledger. When I looked again, it was gone. And you heard nothing?" "Nothing. Not a sound. Only—" She hesitated. "Only what?" "I thought I felt a draught, but the windows were closed." The inspector surveyed the room again. Thick carpets, heavy curtains. No hidden panels. No footprints. The safe required both key and combination, both of which Miss Graves possessed. Yet she swore she had not left her place. Within an hour the matter reached the newspapers. By morning, all of London spoke of little else. The Ashcroft blue was famous not merely for its value, but for its history. It had survived wars, fires, and scandals. Now it had vanished without a trace. Rumors spread swiftly. Some said an international gang had arrived in the city. Others whispered of insurance fraud. A few suggested the diamond had never existed at all. But the strangest development came shortly after noon. A letter arrived at Scotland Yard. It contained no signature, no demand. Only a single sentence, typed with precise care. "The diamond is safe. It will return when the truth is seen." Enclosed with the letter was another white glove. This one bore a faint stain blue, like powdered sapphire. The inspector, a practical man with little patience for riddles, felt an uncharacteristic chill. There was something deliberate in the calm tone, something almost superior, as though the writer believed himself beyond suspicion. He summoned Miss Graves again. She denied all knowledge. Her distress appeared genuine, yet the evidence pointed nowhere else. The partners of the firm clamored for results. The press mocked the police. The public grew fascinated. And the thief, whoever he or she might be, remained invisible. It was then that a discreet note reached a certain small apartment, written in elegant hand and requesting the assistance of a most particular gentleman. The case, it declared, involved not merely theft, but psychology, vanity, deception, and the peculiar logic of the human mind. The note concluded with a curious remark: "The glove, monsieur, is the key, but it is not the hand that wore it which matters. It is the hand that could not." And as the afternoon light faded beyond the misty streets, the stage was set for an investigation that would reveal not only a criminal, but a conspiracy stretching far deeper than a single diamond one that had already claimed its first victim, though no one yet knew it. The following morning, precisely at 10, a modest motorcar drew up before the shuttered facade of Ashcroft Blythe. From it descended a small, impeccably dressed gentleman with a waxed moustache and eyes that missed very little. Hercule Poirot paused a moment upon the pavement of Bond Street, surveying the establishment as though it were a suspect already under examination. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unease. The inspector greeted him with visible relief. though he attempted to mask it beneath official dignity. Miss Graves sat pale but composed. Mr. Harold Blythe paced near the office door, his agitation poorly concealed beneath indignation. Poirot bowed slightly to each, murmured polite sympathies, and requested before any explanation that he be permitted to stand alone in the office where the crime had occurred. He did not immediately approach the safe. Instead, he studied the room as a whole. His gaze lingered upon the heavy curtains, the carpet, the arrangement of chairs. He walked slowly along the wall, fingertips brushing the polished wood of the cabinets. At last he crouched before the open safe and examined its interior without touching it. "The glove," he said gently. The inspector handed it over in a sealed envelope. Poirot withdrew it carefully, turning it beneath the light. He raised it to his nose, inhaled faintly, then smiled almost imperceptibly. "You observe something?" the inspector asked. "But certainly. I observe many things. That is my profession." He laid the glove upon the velvet shelf once more, precisely where it had been found. Then he stepped back and tilted his head. "It sits," he murmured, "too comfortably." "Too comfortably," Blythe snapped. "It was placed there by the thief." "Ah, yes, placed. That is precisely the word." He requested to see the second glove delivered to Scotland Yard. When it arrived, he compared them side by side. Identical in make, identical in size. But he noted the faint blue stain upon the second and asked at once for a chemical analysis. "Powdered sapphire, we believe," the inspector replied. "Traces consistent with polishing residue." Poirot nodded. "And yet, monsieur, the Ashcroft blue was never polished within the shop, was it?" Blythe stiffened. "Certainly not. Such work is done by specialists. Outside the premises." "Yes." Poirot's eyes flickered. A small silence followed. He turned abruptly to Miss Graves. "Mademoiselle, when you opened the safe, you say the diamond was there." "Yes, monsieur. You are absolutely certain?" "I would stake my life upon it." Poirot regarded her kindly. "That may not be necessary." He moved toward the window and examined the latch. Firm, undisturbed. He knelt to inspect the carpet before the safe. No visible marks. Yet his fingers hovered above the fibers as though sensing something unseen. "Tell me," he asked lightly, "does anyone here wear gloves while handling the diamond?" "Always," Blythe answered, "to prevent oils from damaging the stone." "White gloves?" "Yes, of course. And where are these gloves kept?" "In the lower drawer of the desk." Poirot opened the drawer. Inside lay several pairs neatly folded. He counted them. 4 pairs. Before yesterday, he asked without looking up, how many pairs were there? Blythe hesitated. 5, I believe. You believe? Well, yes. 5. Poirot closed the drawer softly. "So, we have 5 pairs. Now we have 4 pairs. And 2 single gloves." The inspector frowned. "That suggests nothing." "A glove could easily have been taken from the drawer." "Precisely," Poirot said. "Easily." He rose and approached Miss Graves once more. "You mentioned a draft." "Yes, but the windows are secure. The door locked. No chimney in this room, and yet you felt air." She nodded faintly. Poirot's gaze drifted upward to the ceiling. There, nearly invisible against the ornate plasterwork, was a narrow ventilation grille. "Inspector," he said quietly, "have you examined the passage above this vent?" "There is no passage," the inspector replied, "only the ceiling void." "Ah, and who has access to that void?" "A maintenance corridor, I suppose, but it is quite narrow." Poirot smiled thinly. "Narrow, but perhaps sufficient." Blythe's pacing ceased. "Surely you do not suggest someone climbed through the ceiling like a burglar in a penny dreadful?" Poirot turned to him with polite gravity. "I suggest nothing yet. I merely observe that Mademoiselle felt air, and air must come from somewhere." He paused, then added softly, "And I observe something else." All eyes turned toward him. "The gloves in the drawer are arranged by size. 4 pairs, each slightly larger than this one." He lifted the single glove delicately. "This is the smallest." Miss Graves stared. "But I never exactly," Poirot murmured. A silence fell, thick as the fog outside. The inspector shifted uneasily. "What are you implying?" Poirot's gaze moved slowly from Blythe to Miss Graves, then to the safe itself. "I imply only that the glove was not left to mislead us," he said at last. "It was left to speak. But like all eloquent things, it does not tell the truth, it reveals character. And whose character? Blythe demanded. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. That, he replied, is what we shall discover when we determine who, in this room, could not possibly have worn it. Poirot settled into a high-backed chair near the window, his gaze drifting thoughtfully over the polished floorboards, the safe, and the carefully arranged desks. "We must speak," he said softly, "to everyone who was present yesterday, and those who had reason to be nearby." The inspector nodded, a little impatient, while Miss Graves trembled as if anticipating more scrutiny. The first to speak was Mr. Blythe, his pride wounded, his speech rapid and rehearsed. "I left the shop at precisely 6 o'clock. I had a dinner engagement. I locked the front door myself. Nothing untoward occurred before my departure. I assure you, monsieur, our security is impeccable. No one could enter without being observed." Poirot nodded, stroking his moustache. "And yet," he murmured, "the diamond is gone." "Tell me, monsieur, did you notice anything unusual yesterday among the staff? A glance, a hesitation, a gesture?" Blythe shifted uncomfortably. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We are all dedicated professionals." Poirot's eyes flicked to Miss Graves. "And you, mademoiselle, you were alone when you discovered the theft?" Yes, she said quickly. "I was arranging the ledger, and when I turned back, it was gone." "And the ledger?" Poirot inquired. "Was it disturbed?" "No, I don't think so. I only glanced." Poirot's gaze lingered on her. There was something in her expression of eagerness to please, to convince, but beneath it, a trace of hesitation. He made a mental note. He needed more than statements, he needed truth revealed in the cracks. Next, he questioned a delivery boy who had been seen loitering near the street the previous evening. "I was only passing, monsieur," he said, nervously twirling his cap. "I never entered the shop. I didn't see anyone suspicious." "And yet," Poirot said gently, "you had access to the back lane?" The boy nodded. "Yes." Poirot's thin lips pressed together. "Access, opportunity, but not necessarily involvement." Still, he filed away the detail. The inspector introduced a cleaner who arrived early that morning to tidy the shop before opening. Her version was precise, almost too precise. The floorboards were swept, the carpets vacuumed, the safe area spotless. "I noticed nothing at all out of place. Not a thing." She smiled tightly. "I always do my work thoroughly." Poirot regarded her with subtle interest. "Always?" he repeated. "Even yesterday, on the morning you arrived?" "Yes, monsieur. I am always thorough. Remarkable," Poirot said softly, though his eyes suggested suspicion. Her insistence rang too clean, too rehearsed. Small exaggerations often hid larger truths. He turned his attention back to Miss Graves, whose voice had grown quieter as the questioning progressed. "You say the safe was locked after your check?" "Yes. I locked it." "Did anyone else touch it?" "No, I don't believe so." Poirot leaned forward, hands clasped. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did you notice the other pairs of gloves in the drawer yesterday?" She hesitated, frowning. I didn't count them. I just used one pair and returned it." "And the others?" he pressed gently. "Still there?" "Yes, I think so. I did not check carefully." Poirot made no comment. He did not need to. Small contradictions were surfacing naturally. Blythe's certainty of security, the cleaner's too perfect memory, Miss Graves' slight confusion, all threads in a web that was not yet visible to others, but unmistakable to him. He requested to see the ledger once more. Opening it, he examined the entries carefully, noting the penmanship, the dates, the times. Nothing overtly suspicious. Yet Poirot sensed patterns in what was included and what was conspicuously absent. He observed the ink smudges, the slight indentations where a page had been pressed too hard. One minor detail caught his eye. A ledger page, hastily turned back, bore a faint fingerprint not of Miss Graves, not of Blythe, but someone whose presence was fleeting, almost forgotten. Poirot rose and addressed the room. "Each of you has spoken truth in part, and in part you have omitted. Some of your memories are sharp, others blurred. The mind plays tricks when one wishes to conceal, or when one fears to reveal. Fear, pride, or greed, they leave subtle traces. And it is in these traces, not in the loud declarations, that we shall find the thief. The inspector shifted uneasily. Are you suggesting one of us? Poirot raised a finger, calm yet commanding. Not yet, but I suggest that all is not as it seems. Listen closely, monsieur, for voices of deception are always quieter than you expect, and they speak even when words remain unspoken. As he spoke, his eyes swept across the room again, lingering just long enough on each face to note the smallest flickers, a tightened jaw, a restless hand, a blink too rapid. Each motion, each hesitation, each small contradiction was a clue in the puzzle. The detective's mind, ever methodical, began to assemble a picture invisible to others. The room was calm, the staff cooperative, the police efficient, but beneath the surface, the machinery of a subtle deceit was already turning, and Poirot intended to follow it to its source. Poirot retreated to a quiet corner of the office, leaning back in his chair as he allowed the details of the day to settle in his mind like pieces of a delicate puzzle. Each word spoken by the witnesses, each small hesitation or overemphasis, revealed more than they intended. But to discern the truth, he knew he must examine the motives underlying the actions, for it was not merely opportunity that drove a thief, but desire often tangled, convoluted, and layered with emotion. He began with Mr. Blythe, pacing again near the window, cheeks flushed with frustration. Poirot's sharp gaze took in the man's hands, restless yet careful, the way he avoided certain topics yet spoke freely of the shop's finances. "Monsieur Blythe," he said softly, "you are anxious for the diamond to be recovered, I know. Yet there is a ledger entry dated yesterday that seems irregular, a transfer of funds to a lesser-known account abroad. Can you explain this?" Blythe's face paled. "It is routine, monsieur. Part of an investment for the firm. Nothing unusual, I assure you." His voice wavered slightly, betraying the confidence he tried to convey. Poirot nodded, letting it pass, storing the detail. Greed, he mused, could sometimes hide behind professionalism, or what passed for it. But the ledger entry alone did not constitute evidence. It was merely the first thread in a more intricate web. Miss Graves, seated quietly, drew his attention next. Her youth, her apparent innocence, might have disarmed a lesser observer, but Poirot's mind passed nuances that others missed. She had access, yes, but would a loyal employee risk her career? And yet, he recalled the small contradiction regarding the gloves. Perhaps fear or ambition, rather than malice, guided her actions. A stolen glance at the ledger revealed no immediate wealth transfer on her part, yet subtle traces of nervous anticipation hinted at a personal incentive. Perhaps she had been coerced or enticed, or perhaps she acted out of jealousy, jealous of attention lavished on Blythe by clients or society. He filed the idea for further contemplation. He then considered the cleaner, who had been excessively meticulous. Poirot had noticed the tension beneath her rigid composure. Was it pride, or perhaps fear? A careful study of her movements the previous day might reveal an unobserved opportunity. And what of the delivery boy, so eager to present himself as innocent? He had access to the rear alleyway, an opportunity too convenient to ignore. Perhaps he had been bribed, or perhaps he sought revenge for a slight real or imagined. The layers of possible motives intertwined, none fully explaining the act alone. Poirot rose, walking slowly among the desks, tracing imaginary lines between each person, each clue. He considered relationships. Blythe and Miss Graves, employer and devoted employee, the cleaner and staff, observer yet invisible the boy, transient yet present. Jealousy, pride, fear, ambition, all these human forces intersected like invisible wires, taut and delicate, each capable of being plucked to trigger action. But the motive for the theft, he realized, was not a single note, but a chord. Multiple impulses resonating in secrecy, converging upon the moment when opportunity arose. He opened the ledger again, focusing on patterns. Small, seemingly inconsequential entries, late deliveries, forgotten signatures, minor errors revealed connections between names and times. Someone had anticipated absence, someone else had timed a visit, yet no one narrative explained everything. The threads of motive formed a maze, a labyrinth of human desire in which each suspect could have acted, yet each could plausibly have been innocent. Poirot paused before the safe, his fingers lightly brushing the velvet. "Observe, my friends," he murmured to himself, "it is never merely theft, it is psychology." The diamond is only an object. The true prize is ambition, fear, or envy. One must follow the mind that planned, not merely the hand that reached. He closed his eyes briefly, envisioning each suspect's thoughts, each subtle gesture and concealed hope. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. Blythe, anxious to protect reputation and assets, Miss Graves, tempted by attention, opportunity, perhaps desire to prove cleverness. The cleaner, meticulous and watchful, aware of what others overlooked, the boy, young, restless, opportunistic. Each had a reason, each could act, yet the puzzle remained unsolved. The web was complete, but the spider, she, or they were still hidden in the shadows. Poirot opened his eyes, calm and deliberate. He whispered, almost to himself. The motive maze is never a straight path. But the exit is always marked by the smallest error. One gesture, one contradiction, and then the truth will reveal itself. The following afternoon brought what most considered a triumph. Scotland Yard had traced a suspicious transaction linked to a minor pawnshop in East London. The inspector, brimming with pride, announced that the stolen Ashcroft blue diamond had been recovered, tucked into a nondescript parcel behind a stack of ledgers at the shop. The news spread rapidly, and even the morning fog seemed lighter, as if the city itself approved. Blythe allowed a weary smile, Miss Graves exhaled in relief, and the cleaner, at least outwardly, seemed content that her meticulousness had contributed to a resolution. Poirot arrived at the pawnshop with the inspector to inspect the parcel. He opened it with precise care, revealing the diamond nestled in a small box, its brilliance dimmed only by the grime of handling. The crowd of onlookers murmured in astonishment. The inspector beamed. At last, he declared, justice has been done. Yet Poirot did not smile. He observed the diamond, then the surroundings, the cramped room, the dusty ledgers, the pawnbroker, a man with shifty eyes. Everything seemed too neat, too tidy. He picked up a ledger from the stack. The dates of acquisition were recent, the entries hurriedly written. He noted the pawnshop owner's manner, polite, almost deferential, eager to appear cooperative. And yet there was something discordant, something that did not align with the human nature of a true thief. "Who brought this here?" Poirot asked softly, examining the man closely. "An acquaintance," the pawnbroker replied. "A gentleman, well-dressed, rather hurried. Left in a cab shortly after arriving." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you have no record of this gentleman's name, address, or occupation?" "No, monsieur. Only the parcel and the payment." The detective turned the diamond in his hand, watching the way it caught the light. "Remarkable," he murmured. "A diamond of immense value, delivered anonymously. Convenient, is it not?" The inspector clapped his hands. "Monsieur Poirot, surely this proves the matter closed. The diamond is recovered. The thief, whoever it was, will be caught soon enough." Poirot shook his head slightly, his expression mild yet resolute. "Ah, monsieur, that is precisely why I am uneasy. The diamond has been returned, that is evident, but the manner of its return, it is too theatrical, too deliberate. A message has been sent, not merely a parcel delivered. Someone wishes us to believe the case is solved, while the true author of the crime remains unseen." The inspector frowned. "Are you suggesting the person who stole it is still at large?" "Mais oui," Poirot said softly, placing the diamond back in its box. "A trap has been laid, monsieur. A false victory. Consider the glove, the ledger, the minor contradictions. These were carefully orchestrated to mislead. And now the diamond itself has been returned to encourage complacency. But a true criminal never works without purpose. If all were resolved, why would a letter have been sent? Why a staged recovery? This is a performance, not a conclusion." Blythe and Miss Graves exchanged worried glances. Poirot's eyes, however, remained fixed on the small, dusty ledgers beside the pawnbroker's counter. Subtle details, smudged fingerprints, slightly shifted pages, ink with faint variations called to him with a quiet insistence. He noted the pawnbroker's eagerness to cooperate, the ease with which he produced the parcel, the rapidity of the diamond's appearance. All suggested one truth. Someone wanted the authorities and the public to see the case as complete. "And the pawnbroker?" the inspector asked, noticing Poirot's concern. Poirot tapped the side of his nose. "A convenient actor in a careful play." Useful, yes. Suspicious, perhaps not. But the mind behind the theft, that mind remains hidden, observing, anticipating. Soon, monsieur, it will act again, for one cannot leave a brilliant diamond, a publicized theft, and the world's attention without consequence. Patience, observation, and small attention to detail these will reveal the true culprit, for the criminal is always revealed by what he cannot control. The inspector sighed, half frustrated, half intrigued, while Blythe clenched his fists, muttering about insurance and scandal. Miss Graves shivered, sensing a larger game at play. Poirot, calm and deliberate, tucked the diamond carefully into a protective case, then allowed himself a brief, faint smile. The world believed the case closed, but the detective knew otherwise. Shadows lingered, and somewhere, hidden behind courtesy and civility, the real mastermind awaited the perfect moment to strike again. That evening, Poirot returned to his small, orderly apartment in London, the diamond carefully locked away in its protective case. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the fog settle once more over the streets of Bond Street. The city seemed calm, almost indifferent to the intricate human motives that pulsed beneath its lamps and storefronts. Yet the detective's mind was far from idle. He reviewed the details of the day, speaking softly to himself in the familiar cadence of thought. "The false victory is never complete," he murmured. "One detail, subtle, overlooked, may reveal all." His eyes fell upon the ledger once more, the faint fingerprints and smudges he had noticed earlier. But it was not the ledger itself that called to him. It was a memory of another theft, long ago, involving a minor branch of Ashcroft Blythe, some 15 years past. A diamond of lesser value had disappeared under peculiar circumstances. At the time, the case had gone cold, the culprit never found, but the police had recorded a peculiar detail. A single white glove, almost identical to those found yesterday, left deliberately as a clue. Poirot's mind sharpened. The repetition was too precise to ignore. He returned to the ledger, cross-referencing names, dates, and positions within the firm. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The same family names long associated with the company appeared in both the old and current entries. The lineage of the employees, forgotten by many, connected past and present. The pawnbroker's distant cousin had once been employed at the branch where the earlier theft had occurred. Miss Graves' mother had served as an apprentice there. Even Blythe's uncle had held a position in that very office 15 years prior. He murmured again, tapping the ledger lightly. The threads of history. How they twist unseen. The significance was subtle yet profound. This was no mere impulsive theft. It was a carefully rehearsed plan, informed by knowledge of the company's history, of patterns in human behavior that persisted across generations. Someone had studied the past, learned from its failures, and now used it as a template for the present. The glove, the ledger, the staged recovery of the diamond all were familiar elements, echoing a precedent that had once confounded the authorities. Poirot rose, moving to a shelf lined with his neatly arranged case files. He retrieved the old police report, leafing through yellowed pages. The same inconsistencies, the same deliberate distractions, the same reliance on human pride, and predictable reactions. He saw them clearly now. A mind that respects pattern, he whispered. A mind that anticipates not merely action but reaction, for the past teaches what the present might obscure. His gaze drifted to Miss Graves. A loyal employee, yes, but connected to the very office that had suffered theft years ago. The cleaner's meticulousness, previously dismissed, now suggested inherited caution, an awareness passed down by mentors who had once served the same firm. Even the pawnbroker's distant connection explained a familiarity with protocol and discretion. All the suspects, seemingly unrelated in the present, were in fact bound by history, by the invisible weight of precedent, by ties that had lain dormant until now. Poirot took a deep breath, pacing slowly. The criminal exploits not merely opportunity, but memory, he said aloud, savoring the thought. The past provides templates, expectations, and blind spots. One must observe, not only the present, but the echoes of history to uncover the truth. He returned once more to the ledger and the gloves, examining them in tandem. The identical white glove of the old case, the careful arrangement of the remaining pairs, the subtle blue stain all now took on new meaning. These were not random theatrics. They were messages, carefully rehearsed, signaling both skill and intimate knowledge of the firm's inner workings. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. The crime, he realized, was no longer merely a theft of a gem. It was a dialogue with the past, a rehearsal of forgotten patterns, and the true perpetrator remained hidden, confident that the lesson of history would remain unnoticed. Yet Poirot, with his unmatched attention to detail, had found the link. The shadows of Bond Street extended far deeper than anyone imagined, stretching back through years of secrets, guiding present deeds with invisible fingers. And somewhere, in the quiet streets below, the criminal waited, assured that the web of the past had concealed them. But Poirot, aware of the connections that others overlooked, already had the outline of the net he would cast, patiently, to reveal the truth. The following morning, Poirot returned to Ashcroft Blythe, carrying with him a small leather case of his own devising. He did not enter with authority, nor with formal summons. He arrived as a quiet observer, letting the day unfold around him. His plan was simple yet ingenious. Rather than confront the suspects directly, he would employ a method he had often found effective, one that relied not on questions, but on observation under carefully crafted conditions. "Mes amis," he said, addressing Blythe, Miss Graves, and the cleaner, who had all been summoned under the pretense of reviewing the recovered diamond security. "Today we shall conduct a small exercise. It requires nothing more than honesty and attention." He placed a blank ledger upon the counter and handed each participant a pen. "You are to describe, in your own words, how you discovered the theft, and what you recall of the diamond's last moments before it vanished." The instructions were deliberately open-ended. "Write freely." And without hesitation, Poirot added, "For the mind is most revealing when it is unprepared to lie." Blythe, confident and self-assured, immediately began a polished narrative, precise in every detail, almost rehearsed. Miss Graves hesitated slightly, then wrote, her lines fluid but punctuated with small pauses. The cleaner, meticulous as always, produced a rigid, overly detailed account. Poirot read their words silently, making no comment. Then, as the three were writing, he introduced the unusual element. From his case, he produced a small vial of fine sapphire powder, similar in color to the blue stain on the second glove. He sprinkled a trace lightly across the ledger, deliberately within sight but never touching the writing. "Consider this a representation," he said softly, "of what can linger unseen and of what the mind may leave behind even when one believes it careful." The reaction was immediate and revealing. Blythe barely glanced, his confidence unshaken. The cleaner stiffened, adjusting her posture, her fingers tightening around the pen. But Miss Graves froze, her hand hovering over the page. She blinked rapidly, her breathing slightly accelerated, and her gaze flickered toward the vial with unmistakable apprehension. Poirot observed silently, noting the micro-expressions others might dismiss. The slight blanching of her cheeks, the subtle twitch of her jaw, the hesitation that grew into visible unease. He allowed the moment to stretch, then spoke gently. "Ah, mademoiselle, you see, even when the mind seeks concealment, the body cannot lie. It is in these gestures, these tiny reactions, that the truth whispers." Miss Graves stammered, lowering her pen. I do not understand, monsieur." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming faintly. "You see, the powder is harmless, yet it symbolizes a subtle trace of the theft, present though unnoticed. And your reaction, it speaks volumes. You are concerned that attention might reveal more than you intended." The inspector frowned, uneasy with the method. "So are you saying she?" Poirot lifted a finger, calm and deliberate. "Not yet. But the smallest cracks in the facade often appear in unexpected ways. One's conscience, or fear of discovery, is a far more reliable witness than words. Observe, Blythe's poise remains intact, the cleaner's tension is contained, but mademoiselle, her hesitation betrays a thought that lingers, a memory she cannot entirely control." He allowed the implication to settle in the room. Miss Graves, now visibly anxious, averted her eyes, fidgeting with the edge of her uniform. The inspector cleared his throat but said nothing. Blythe, still confident, shifted uneasily at the unspoken accusation in the detective's calm tone. Poirot smiled faintly to himself. "Ah! The human mind, monsieur," he murmured, almost to no one in particular. "It reveals more than any ledger ever could. One need only watch, observe, and interpret the subtlest signs. And in this case, the unconventional clue has spoken far more clearly than routine inquiry ever could. He collected the ledger, noting carefully which lines were hesitant, which gestures betrayed thought, and which pauses carried weight. The game was advancing slowly, yet decisively. The criminal, so careful until now, had left the first unguarded sign, and Poirot knew that this subtle opening would lead him, in time, to the heart of the conspiracy that had cast its long shadow over Bond Street. The following morning, Poirot arrived at the office earlier than usual, the streets of Bond Street still damp from overnight mist. His mind was focused, turning over every detail of the previous day's exercise with the ledger and the sapphire powder. He had anticipated that small cracks would appear, and now he intended to see whether the clues could lead him closer to the truth. He reached for the ledger from its place on the counter, but it was gone. A jolt of surprise passed through him, swift and controlled. The room was empty, save for the staff, who now appeared nervous, glancing at one another with an anxiety that had not been there before. Blythe's hands trembled slightly as he tried to maintain composure. "I don't understand," he stammered. "It was right here this morning." Poirot's eyes swept the room. No ledger, no disturbance, no signs of forced entry. Even the smallest object, an ink blot, a page marker, a stray fingerprint, had vanished. The meticulous order of the office, the very thing he had relied upon, had been breached. The cleaner wrung her hands. "I didn't touch it, monsieur, I swear." "And you?" Poirot asked Miss Graves softly, eyes fixed upon her. She shook her head, lips pressed tightly together, but her eyes flickered toward the back door, almost imperceptibly. A small gesture, yet it did not escape Poirot's attention. The inspector arrived moments later, summoned by Blythe. He examined the scene, muttering about security cameras, though Bond Street shops, even in these modern days, were not yet fully equipped. "Someone's stolen it," he said bluntly, "or perhaps moved it elsewhere. Either way, this complicates matters." "Mais oui, monsieur," Poirot agreed, though he did not sound perturbed. Instead, his calmness carried a quiet intensity. The ledger, a simple book, yet a repository of truth, and now it has vanished. Someone wishes to halt discovery, to bury the evidence before it can speak. The criminal is aware that our progress is too swift, too precise. They act preemptively, with cunning and timing. He examined the surroundings, noting the small details. The slight disturbance in the carpet near the safe, the faint scuff marks beneath the desk, the subtle shift of a chair. All minute indicators that someone had handled the office with purpose and care. "No, it is not mere theft," Poirot murmured. "It is obstruction, a warning, and perhaps a test." Blythe's face had grown pale. "But the diamond has been returned. What more could they want?" "Ah," Poirot said softly. "It is never the object alone, monsieur. It is knowledge, patterns, observations. This ledger contains precisely the insights necessary to connect past and present, to reveal the mind that orchestrated all. Without it, the trail becomes obscured." Miss Graves fidgeted again, wringing her hands. Poirot's gaze caught hers and held it, calm but penetrating. "You see, mademoiselle, a thief for an accomplice understands not merely the act but the investigation. They know which pieces of evidence are dangerous, which reveal too much. And now the ledger is gone, just as it was needed most." The inspector sighed, frustration evident in every movement. "We must search the premises again, monsieur." "Perhaps it is here somewhere hidden." Poirot shook his head slightly. "No, it has been removed with precision. Observe how clean the surroundings remain. No panic, no hurried misplacement. The hand that did this is careful, deliberate, and confident." He moved to the window and glanced down at the street below. Somewhere out there, beyond the misty glass, the criminal continued to move among the crowds, cloaked by anonymity, aware that their scheme was advancing. And yet, Poirot knew that even in this apparent setback, the tiniest oversight, the subtlest trace, would betray the perpetrator. The stakes had risen, the ledger gone, and trust among those in the room had grown fragile. But the detective's mind, ever alert, began already to map a new path through shadows, anticipating the moment when the truth, once again, would emerge. The afternoon had descended into a chill, damp haze over Bond Street. and Poirot remained at the office, reviewing every detail of the vanished ledger in his mind. He had instructed the staff to remain where they were, to limit movement, yet even as he did, a faint unease crept through the room, an intangible pressure that hinted the game was far from over. A sharp, sudden ring of the telephone cut through the quiet. The inspector answered, muttering a few words, then froze, eyes widening. "Mon Dieu!" he exclaimed. "Monsieur Poirot. It is Mr. Blythe. He's been attacked. He's in his private office." Blood Poirot's calm demeanor stiffened, his gaze narrowing with measured intensity. He rose and moved swiftly toward the private office. The scene there was chaos in miniature. Blythe, slumped over his desk, pale and gasping, bore a shallow but precise wound to his shoulder. A letter lay open on the blotter, written in elegant, deliberate handwriting. "Do not pursue further. The past must remain buried. One more step, and there will be consequences." The inspector checked the wound, calling for immediate medical attention, but Poirot's eyes were already scanning the room, noting details that others dismissed in the rush of concern. A window slightly ajar, though the latch was supposed to be locked, a scuff on the carpet leading toward the side door, the faint smell of cologne that did not belong to any of the staff. Miss Graves clutched her hands to her chest. But how could someone hear? Now, Poirot approached the desk, careful not to touch anything. It is evident that the thief, the mastermind, is aware of our methods, our pace, and now wishes to intimidate. Not merely to steal, but to control the narrative, to dictate fear. The attack is a signal. The game has escalated, the inspector muttered, pacing nervously. "We've recovered the diamond." "What more do they want?" Poirot turned, eyes sharp. But the diamond is merely a lure. The ledger, the patterns, the knowledge, it is these which threaten our antagonist. And now, monsieur, we see that the threat extends beyond objects. Human lives are, for the first time, at risk. A sudden noise, soft creak from the hallway, drew their attention. Poirot's gaze snapped to the sound, his senses alert. He moved quietly, stepping past Blythe and Miss Graves toward the source. The hallway was empty, yet the signs of passage were clear. A displaced rug, a faint smear of dust on the skirting board, as if someone had fled moments before, aware they were observed. Poirot's mind raced. The timeline of events, the vanished ledger, the returned diamond, the attack, each thread now wove a pattern unmistakable in its precision. The criminal was no longer content to manipulate evidence alone. They were proactive, moving ahead, anticipating each step of the investigation. "Observe, Inspector," Poirot said quietly, almost to himself. "This is no longer a matter of reconstruction. The villain has transformed the crime into a living chessboard. Each move forces us to react, to respond, to chase shadows. But remember, even the cleverest adversary cannot account for one factor: the mind of the detective who anticipates the unexpected." Blythe, still pale but now more alert, looked to Poirot with a mixture of fear and reliance. "Monsieur, what should we do?" "How can we stop them before someone else is harmed?" Poirot's eyes, cold and penetrating, scanned the office once more. "We proceed carefully. We predict, we observe, and we bait. The ledger is gone, the diamond has been returned, yet the criminal has revealed themselves in impatience, in the attack, in overconfidence. That impatience will be their undoing. And now," he added softly, "we must anticipate their next move before it is too late, for the shadows of Bond Street are long, and the villain is still far ahead but not beyond the reach of a careful mind." As the medical team arrived to attend to Blythe, Poirot stood near the window, the London fog swirling below, his eyes narrowed, calculating. A new chapter had begun, one not of theft alone, but of danger, deception, and a race against time. The game had shifted, and the detective knew that only by thinking several steps beyond the criminal could the next tragedy be averted. The evening descended quietly over Bond Street, the lamps casting long, flickering shadows across the polished pavements. Poirot sat in the small office, the chaos of the day still lingering in his mind: the vanished ledger, Blythe's attack, the vague but threatening letter, but he allowed himself to think calmly, deliberately. For while others were distracted by fear and urgency, he sought the invisible threads, the subtle consistencies that would reveal the pattern beneath the disorder. He reopened the ledger's empty place on the counter, letting his fingers hover as though the book itself could whisper secrets. Then his eyes fell on something small, almost laughably trivial. A tiny smear of ink on the edge of the blotter, overlooked by all in the rush to examine the attack and the diamond. It was barely perceptible, a faint line, as though someone had pressed the nib too heavily and wiped it away without thought. Poirot's mind clicked. He recalled Miss Graves' earlier hesitation, the way her fingers had trembled over the sapphire powder, and the slight flinch she had given at the mention of the ledger. Then he remembered Blythe's defensiveness when questioned about the ledger entries, the subtle unease in the cleaner's otherwise precise movements, and the pawnbroker's too ready cooperation when the diamond had been recovered. Each small reaction, each minor detail, had seemed disconnected, almost random, but now, together, they formed a chain. He leaned forward, visualizing the sequence: the theft of the Ashcroft blue, the careful placement of the gloves, the staged recovery, the vanishing ledger, and finally the attack on Blythe. Each act had a single hidden function: to mislead, to test reactions, to reveal information about knowledge, opportunity, and fear. And now, in that tiny ink smear, he recognized the invisible signature of the criminal. A subtle overconfidence, a human error left unconsciously in plain sight. Poirot rose, walking slowly through the room. His eyes scanned the familiar office. Every detail previously dismissed now carried significance. The ledger had been taken, yes, but the diary Blythe kept of personal notes, hidden at the back of a locked drawer, had not. The pawnbroker's distant connections, the cleaner's meticulous attention, Miss Graves' minor nervous gestures all pointed toward a single unseen architect, someone who had studied both the past and present behaviors of the staff to exploit weaknesses. He paused at the window, gazing down at the fog-bound street below, letting the thoughts settle. "Ah, oui," he murmured softly. The pattern emerges, not in the grand gestures, but in the tiny slipsed quiver of a finger, the hesitation in a glance, the faintest trace of ink. It is the constancy of human nature, repeated through fear, pride, and desire, that allows one to predict, to manipulate. Poirot returned to the counter and picked up a small pencil that had rolled from the ledger tray. The graphite tip bore a faint trace of the same sapphire powder used in yesterday's exercise, a detail unnoticed by anyone but him. He smiled ever so slightly. The criminal had inadvertently marked themselves, confident in the manipulation of events but unaware that a subtle habit, repeated too often, would betray them. He considered Blythe, Miss Graves, the cleaner, and the pawnbroker. Each played a role, knowingly or not, in the unfolding drama. Yet the true mastermind, the one who orchestrated not only the theft but the distraction, the misdirection. And now the attack had left just enough of a signature in their methods to be traced by a mind attuned to subtlety. Poirot leaned back, calm and deliberate. "The pattern is clear," he said aloud. "The movements, the reactions, the choices, all speak the same language. And once one understands the language, one sees the map of the crime, drawn invisibly, in plain sight all along. The villain believes they are clever, unseen, but they have repeated themselves, and repetition is the clue that unmasks even the most cunning." Outside, the city hummed with indifferent life, unaware that within the quiet office above, the chaos of Bond Street was slowly being ordered into revelation. Poirot, eyes narrowed and mind alight with understanding, prepared to follow the pattern to its inevitable conclusion, confident that the truth, long hidden, would soon be revealed. Poirot spent the evening in quiet contemplation, reviewing every fragment of information that had come to light. The ledger, the diamond, the vanished evidence, Blythe's article were pieces of a complex choreography, but now, with the subtle pattern emerging, he began to see the deeper pulse driving the entire affair. It was not greed alone, it was not rivalry, nor mere revenge. There was a psychological current beneath the crime, invisible to all but the keenest eye. He called the staff together again, under the pretense of reviewing security protocols. Blythe, pale but recovering, stood stiffly by the window. Miss Graves' fingers twisted nervously in front of her, while the cleaner maintained her usual rigid posture. Poirot addressed them calmly, his gaze moving from one face to another. "Mes amis," he said softly. "The theft, the misdirection, even the attack yesterday, all were orchestrated with great care. Yet there is one element that you cannot fully conceal, your own desire. Not desire for wealth, not desire for position, but desire to exert control over another's perception. And when that desire becomes obsessive, One may cross boundaries that reason itself cannot justify. He paused, letting the words sink in, watching reactions. Blythe shifted uneasily. The cleaner blinked rapidly, glancing away. Miss Graves' face grew pale, her lips parting slightly, a flicker of recognition passing in her eyes. Poirot moved closer, his voice gentle but commanding. "Mademoiselle," he said, turning his attention fully to her, "you have been helpful, even loyal, yet you feared discovery. Your actions were not taken from greed alone, nor from fear of exposure. No, they were driven by something far more personal." Miss Graves' eyes darted to Blythe, then to the floor, but she said nothing. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, his expression softening, yet unyielding. "You have sought not only to possess, but to prove your cleverness, to assert superiority, in a world where you felt overlooked. Each step the staged recovery, the ledger manipulation, even your calculated hesitation during the exercise yesterday, was designed to demonstrate intellect, to outwit those around you, to orchestrate reality itself to your liking." Blythe's hand twitched involuntarily. The cleaner's jaw tightened, sensing the inevitable revelation. Miss Graves swallowed hard, finally lifting her gaze. Her eyes, glimmering with a mixture of shame and defiance, met Poirot's. "You mean it wasn't about the diamond?" she whispered. "Ah, but the diamond," Poirot replied, "is never merely a diamond. It is a symbol, a catalyst. For you, mademoiselle, it represented opportunity, the chance to prove, to manipulate, to assert a hidden power over those who underestimated you. It is the mind, rather than the object, that has been tested and displayed throughout this affair." Miss Graves' shoulders slumped, the truth evident in her quiet resignation. I wanted to show that I could outthink everyone," she admitted, voice trembling. "They all relied on routines, on protocol, on assumptions. I thought if I could orchestrate this, I would finally matter, that my intelligence would be recognized." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Exactly. And in your ambition, mademoiselle, you underestimated the consequences. The ledger's disappearance, Blythe's attack, the escalating tension. These were the inevitable results of a mind driven by the need for validation rather than simple gain. A clever plan, yes, but one governed by the deepest of human needs, to be seen, to be acknowledged, to assert identity through mastery over others." The inspector exhaled, incredulous. "So it wasn't about the money or the diamond at all. It was about proving herself." "Precisely, monsieur," Poirot said. "The diamond merely served as a stage, the ledger as a script, and the people around as actors unwittingly participating in her drama. The true crime was psychological, a performance in manipulation and control." Miss Graves lowered her gaze entirely, her fingers twisting together. I didn't mean anyone to get hurt," she murmured. "No, mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, "but the pursuit of recognition can blind even the cleverest to the moral boundaries of action. And so the pattern, once hidden, now reveals itself fully. Not a simple theft, but a complex tapestry of desire, intellect, and the dangerous human need to be acknowledged above all else." As the room absorbed the revelation, the weight of the case shifted. The crime had been solved not by force or chance, but by understanding the intricacies of the human mind, the hidden motive that had driven every move. Poirot allowed a faint, satisfied smile to cross his lips, for the true puzzle, the psychology behind the act, had finally been illuminated. The next morning, Poirot moved with quiet precision, every step measured, every thought aligned to a single purpose. He had studied the patterns, the subtle reactions, the faint traces left behind in moments of distraction. The villain, driven by the need to assert intellect and control, would inevitably act again when presented with the proper bait. It was only a matter of time. He summoned Blythe and the inspector to the office, ostensibly to review enhanced security procedures for the firm, but in truth, the room had been subtly arranged to reveal the truth. Chairs were positioned to restrict sudden movements, the windows secured, and the small ledger recently recovered from a clever concealment by Poirot rested conspicuously on the counter. The Ashcroft blue, once again under careful supervision, gleamed from its case as if challenging the observer. Miss Graves entered last, her steps tentative, eyes scanning the room with subtle unease. Poirot's gaze met hers calmly, unflinching, as though he could already read her mind. "Ah, Mademoiselle, he said gently, you have been most clever, Yet, as you know, even the cleverest make errors when their own ambition guides them too strongly. Her lips parted, ready with a denial, but Poirot continued smoothly. Observe the ledger, the arrangements, the exercises we conducted. You were most attentive yesterday, yes? And yet, when faced with the smallest deviation, the smallest test, your attention faltered. That is why you could not avoid leaving traces, however slight. Even now, they remain. Miss Graves' hands shook slightly. She glanced at the ledger, then at the diamond, and back to Poirot. Monsieur, too don't understand, she stammered. I only wanted to show I could think, to prove that I could see what others could not. Poirot nodded, his calm voice almost a whisper, yet each word struck with quiet force. Exactly. You have confessed to the motive itself, and in doing so, you have revealed the method. The diamond, the ledger, even the staged attack, they were all instruments, conduits through which your intellect would be recognized. But now, mademoiselle, the game must end, for the consequences have grown larger than mere observation. A sudden movement drew Poirot's eyes, a flicker of panic across her face, a subtle step toward the door. He did not raise his voice, did not shout, but with a faint, deliberate motion of his hand, the inspector moved to block the exit. The trap, Poirot said softly, was never in the ledger, nor in the diamond, but in your own reaction. When confronted with the inevitability of discovery, one cannot maintain composure indefinitely. Miss Graves' breathing quickened, and in a final, desperate gesture, she lunged toward the window, as if to escape the room entirely. The inspector moved swiftly, intercepting her, and Poirot's calm command filled the space. Stop, mademoiselle. There is no need for violence. You are surrounded by truth, and your choices now are clear. For a long moment, she froze, chest heaving, eyes darting between Poirot and the inspector. Then, slowly, reluctantly, the tension melted. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into the nearest chair, hands clasped tightly. I did it, she whispered, voice trembling. It was never about the money. I only wanted to prove myself, to show that I could control the situation, that I could think beyond others. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. Not really. Poirot inclined his head, expression serene yet sharp. And in revealing your motive, you have undone yourself, mademoiselle. The cleverness, the ambition, all are exposed. The pattern, once hidden in subtleties, is now plain to see. Your actions, however brilliant, have led directly to this moment. The inspector moved to secure the confession formally, and Blythe, still pale but relieved, exhaled with the weight of the ordeal lifting. Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping the room, calm and composed, knowing that every thread of the complex web had been accounted for, every subtle deception accounted for. Outside, the fog rolled quietly over Bond Street, as though concealing the city's secrets once more. Inside, Poirot allowed himself the faintest smile. The mastermind's ambition had been revealed, their pattern deciphered, and at last, the shadows that had haunted the Ashcroft blue diamond case were dispelled, leaving only truth, consequence, and the quiet justice of a detective who had never overlooked a detail. The air in the office had grown heavy with relief. Blythe had recovered sufficiently to stand by the window, watching the mist swirl across Bond Street. Miss Graves, now quiet and subdued, sat with her hands clasped, her ambitious scheme laid bare. The inspector was organizing the official documentation, already drafting the report that would close the case. Poirot, as always, remained calm, serene in his orderly chair, sipping a quiet cup of tea. The diamond lay secure in its protective case, the ledger back in its place. All seemed concluded. And yet Poirot's eyes, sharp and insistent, did not rest. He studied the room, the people, the faint marks and echoes of previous events. A lingering thought tugged at his itch in the mind that refused to be ignored. He glanced again at the ledger, then at the diamond, and finally at the pawnbroker, who had stood quietly in the corner since the morning. A small, almost imperceptible smirk had played upon the man's lips whenever Poirot's attention wandered. That smirk had gone unnoticed by the inspector, by Blythe, even by Miss Graves, but not by him. Poirot rose, setting his cup down carefully. "Monsieur," he said to the pawnbroker, his voice gentle but insistent, "a final question, if you will permit." When the diamond was returned to your establishment yesterday, who delivered it? You mentioned a gentleman, but did you see him well enough to recognize anything else? The pawnbroker's face flickered, a slight pallor, a brief hesitation that Poirot noted with the precision of a hawk. I didn't see much, monsieur. It was all very hurried. He wore gloves. I could not. Poirot interrupted softly, leaning closer, eyes narrowing with subtle intensity. Yet, you knew exactly how to present the parcel, how to arrange the ledger, how to direct the authorities' attention. You were precise, confident, correct? Perhaps too precise for someone uninvolved. A bead of sweat formed on the man's temple. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The inspector noticed the change, frowning. "What are you implying, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's voice carried that familiar, quiet authority. "I imply, monsieur, that the true architect of the game was not the ambitious Miss Graves, as we believed, but rather someone who orchestrated events from behind the curtain, guiding, shaping, ensuring that the subtle cracks and reactions would appear exactly as they did. Someone with patience, with foresight, with the ability to manipulate both the past and the present." Miss Graves' eyes widened, her own confession forgotten in shock. "You mean someone else?" "Yeah, mademoiselle," Poirot said. "Consider the pawnbroker, distant family connections, intimate knowledge of past thefts, the precise presentation of the parcel, the timing of the ledger's disappearance. Every act carried your fingerprints, or at least what appeared to be your fingerprints, but the design was overseen by another mind entirely. A mind capable of observing, predicting, and shaping events while remaining unnoticed." The pawnbroker's composure broke entirely. He sank into a chair, face pale. It wasn't my plan. Poirot's eyes glimmered with the thrill of discovery. "Non, monsieur. You were a participant, yes, and a useful one. But the grand pattern, the psychological orchestration, the ultimate goal, that rests with another. You followed instructions carefully, but the mastermind was always several steps ahead." The inspector rubbed his forehead. "So the case isn't closed. After all this? Closed for the moment, yes," Poirot said. "But the final truth, the ultimate architect, remains hidden, waiting to see how the pieces will move. And when they act again, when their final hand is revealed, we must be ready, for the game is not yet over. The real villain, monsieur, is still in the shadows, confident, unseen, and anticipating every reaction." A silence settled over the room, broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock. Even the fog outside seemed heavier now, as though hiding more than London streets alone. Poirot returned to his seat, calm but alert, eyes sweeping the room with the quiet intensity of a mind that had seen the end of one layer and immediately begun unraveling the next. The game, he knew, was far from over, and the final revelation would demand all of his legendary insight to expose the true mastermind who had dared to challenge him. The following day, Poirot returned to Bond Street with a quiet sense of resolve. The office had regained its outward calm, the ledger restored, the diamond secured, Miss Graves formally detained, and Blythe busily coordinating repairs and reassurances for the firm. Yet Poirot's mind remained on the unseen architect, the mastermind who had orchestrated the elaborate web of theft, deception, and psychological manipulation. This was a mind that had anticipated every reaction, every hesitation, every test he had devised. He called the pawnbroker aside under the pretense of reviewing the ledger's security. Once alone, Poirot's voice was soft but precise. "Monsieur, you are clever, yes, but even the cleverest cannot obscure everything. The placement of the ledger yesterday, the seemingly trivial timing of Miss Graves' hesitation, the small smudge of sapphire powder on each, was a thread I observed. And by following those threads, I have discovered the hand that guided them." The pawnbroker's face paled, a faint tremor running through his fingers. "Monsieur—" I only acted as instructed." Poirot inclined his head ever so slightly. But the instructions came from a mind both patient and devious, a mind that sought to manipulate events while remaining unseen. Someone who understood not only the past thefts, but also the personalities involved, and who knew that Miss Graves' ambition would be the perfect instrument. "You were a participant, monsieur, but not the architect." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Poirot's lips. "The true mastermind Someone no one suspected, someone who remained invisible in the background, manipulating the other's weaknesses and relying on predictability and pride. Their knowledge of the firm, their understanding of human nature, and their ability to remain unnoticed, these were the final pieces of the puzzle. The inspector, who had joined them quietly, frowned. So the criminal has escaped. Poirot's expression was calm, though his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of comprehension. For now, the architect has vanished, leaving behind the carefully orchestrated chaos, ensuring that justice as we see it is delivered only in part. Miss Graves' confession, the recovery of the diamond, the ledger's return, they are all evidence of partial accountability. Yet the ultimate hand, the mind behind it all, remains at large. And that is precisely why one must always observe the subtlest clues. He gestured to the office around them. Observe the smudge of sapphire on the ledger tray, unnoticed by all but me. The slight irregularity in the sequence of letters in the recovered notes. The hesitation in gestures that appeared confident but carried hidden tension. These are the clues that led me to the invisible architect. Small, subtle, easily dismissed, but they spoke volumes to the attentive eye. The inspector exhaled, a mixture of frustration and admiration. So we have the pieces, but not the final face behind it all. Exactly, Poirot said softly, and that is the nature of human cunning. Some are clever, but few are so careful as to leave themselves entirely concealed. The architect's confidence in the invisibility of their design is their final act of arrogance. One day perhaps they will err, and the pattern will reveal them fully. He turned his gaze to the street outside, the fog drifting lazily across the lamps of Bond Street. Justice has been served partially, but the shadows remain. The lessons are clear, even the smallest gestures, the most trivial detail, carry significance. And a mind attuned to such subtleties can perceive the truth where others see only chaos. Blythe approached, grateful but wary. Monsieur Poirot, will the case ever truly be closed? Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. For those of us who observe, who notice the invisible, it is never truly closed. The lesson endures, the pattern persists, and the shadows will always harbor the cleverest of adversaries. We have accounted for the immediate danger, yes, but the game continues, quietly, in the minds of those who think themselves untouchable. And that, mes amis, is why the detective must always remain a step ahead. As the afternoon fog thickened, wrapping Bond Street in its muted hush, Poirot allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The crime had been unraveled, the human motives revealed, and the clever deception exposed, but the final player, the unseen mastermind, still lurked beyond reach. Justice for now had been delivered, but the lingering shadows promised that the story was not yet over. The evening had grown heavy over Bond Street, the fog curling lazily around lampposts, the gaslights flickering as if in sympathy with the lingering tension in Poirot's mind. He walked slowly away from Ashcroft Blythe, hands clasped behind his back, his steps measured. Miss Graves was escorted quietly to secure custody. The pawnbroker had been questioned thoroughly, and the diamond now rested under careful watch, sparkling innocuously in its glass case. To any casual observer, the case seemed neatly concluded, and yet Poirot's mind did not rest. The pattern had been revealed, the hidden motives uncovered, the visible consequences laid bare, but a subtle disquiet remained. Even now, long after the day's revelations, one fragment refused to settle, 1 minute detail that had seemed trivial yet nagged at the edges of his consciousness. The letter left for Blythe, the careful phrasing, the signature so elegantly neutral, it was too deliberate, too precise. He paused outside the office, inhaling the damp London air. Somewhere in the city, obscured by fog and the anonymity of bustling streets, the true mastermind still lingered. Not in hiding merely, but observing, calculating, waiting for the moment when another mistake or oversight would allow them to act again. The thought was both familiar and unsettling. Poirot had learned long ago that a clever mind never truly disappears, it merely retreats to shadowed corners. As he walked further, his eyes caught the faint reflection of a window across the street. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a figure, the posture faintly familiar, watching the office as though the events inside were a performance under scrutiny. Poirot's lips curved ever so slightly. That would not be the last he heard of Bond Street's shadows. He reflected on the subtle clue, the tiny ink smudge on the ledger tray. Miss Graves' hesitant reactions, the pawnbroker's nervous precision, and realized that while they had unraveled the immediate crisis, the gang had left behind questions that no confession, no evidence, and no recovered object could entirely resolve. What other threads might the invisible architect have woven into the city, into the lives of those who walked these streets, who thought themselves safe in their routines? Even the recovered diamond seemed to gleam with a kind of quiet challenge, as if it knew that its theft had been merely one act in a larger, invisible drama. Poirot's footsteps echoed softly in the damp street, and he allowed himself a brief smile. The city, the fog, the faint hum of life around him, all were a canvas for the next puzzle, the next subtle pattern, waiting to be discerned by the keen eye and disciplined mind. He paused at a street corner, glancing at a small scrap of paper fluttering in the gutter. Bent and weathered, it bore nothing more than a series of numbers and letters, seeming random, meaningless, but Poirot's mind seized upon them instantly. Even in apparent nonsense, there was possibility. Perhaps another plan, another misdirection, another mind at work. The tiny symbol of disorder reminded him that no case was ever entirely closed, and that every solution carried the seeds of the next mystery. With a calm, deliberate step, Poirot turned away, heading toward the soft glow of a nearby street lamp. He moved slowly, methodically, attuned to every shadow, every whisper, every subtle trace the city offered. For while one puzzle had reached its resolution, another awaited, concealed beneath the ordinary, the unnoticed, the overlooked. And as he vanished into the fog, the quiet certainty in his stride spoke volumes. A mystery may conclude for the world, but for the mind of a detective, no case ever truly ends. Somewhere in London, the hidden mastermind watched, patient, deliberate, unseen. And somewhere in the fog, Poirot smiled, ready for the next challenge, certain that the truth, no matter how cleverly concealed, would always yield to observation, deduction, and the genius of a mind that left no detail unexamined. The city exhaled, the night held its breath, and the game continued forever, inevitably in shadows and subtlety.